Election is a process, and it's like a chain. You start from the beginning and end at the end, and all of them are linked together. So from where you have announcement of election, into campaign, into mobilization, into procurement, into logistics, into education, and then the actual voting, and then you now have the what we call results management. And after the results management, we now talk about the declaration. Then, interestingly, the last set that we often neglect is just the judiciary. Right. So, which is also a part of the electoral process. However, this short chain I just mentioned now, you can have it good, and at the end of the day, when you get to the result management, you mess up everything you have done. And what we have done is to look back into the Edo and Ondo election, and then look at the data, the result INEC declare. Look at the IREF result, and then statistically analyze it, and then massive discrepancy, massive irregularities that or inconsistencies that we've seen, that we call on INEC to make sure that, look, you need to work on this and perfect it. So what are some of those things? Number one, mismatched registered voter. Before the election, INEC announced a figure for registered voter. However, Edo election went on with 3 different figures for registered voter. The one INEC released before the election, then the one the collation officer on the day of the election announced, and then the one collated on IREF. 3 different figures. And you don't do election like that. You don't go and have election with 3 different figures of registered voter, because the implication is that which one are you going to rely on to say this is the margin of lead? Which one are you going to rely on to say this is what you have? And at the same time, we even have what INEC released and what the ad hoc officers or the election officer were writing on Form EC8A were totally different. So in some polling units, you have where you maybe you have the registered voter to be like about 200, and by the time the man is writing it, is already putting 280. Wow. So this kind. Then we also have where you have what I call mismatch between accredited voter and the total vote cast. And that is simply just in a layman language, that some ballot paper were missing. Yeah, that is what it means. So, and for instance, in Edo, when you tabulate it, you are looking for about over 29,000 ballot paper in just this concluded election. So what it means is that some people accredited. So when you now have the number of accredited figure more than total vote cast, don't forget, during the gas time, in INEC, you go and do your accreditation, you go back and you come back. But now, then some people don't come back, so your accredited figure can be more than
you can understand.
But now it's simultaneous accreditation and voting. So between you are doing your accreditation and then dropping voting, and then 29,000 ballot paper were missing, unaccounted for. That's huge. So number one, how massive? What it means is that, like I said, in Edo, you have 29,000 ballot paper unaccounted for, over 29,000, and the margin of lead between the winner and the second runner-up in that election was just 44,000. So that 29,000 could either go either way. That is number one. So it's massive. Then number two is there are cases of overvoting. In fact, when you tabulate it, you have in Edo about 400 polling units with overvoting. And what the law says is that whenever you see the case of overvoting, cancellation.
Yes.
Now we did that, we tabulate it. If you look at valid votes in polling units in Edo, where you have overvoting, the total valid vote in those places is just 59,000, over 59,000. So now look at that. 59,000, take it out. That election wouldn't have been a conclusive election. But so that is exactly what we talked about. Again, when it comes to the impact of IREF, you see, IREF is supposed to be a game changer. And in fact, when IREF was introduced in 2020, because what we did was to go to IREF of 2020, scrape the data of Edo, and then compare, and then Ondo for 2020 and compare with 2024. In fact, we're supposed to, I mean, for the first time when they were using IREV in Edo in 2020, we're supposed to have, I mean, a teething problem.
Yeah.
However, what we saw, for instance, now, in Edo, in 2020, one of these registered voters mismatch. In 2020, the total number of registered voter mismatch was 152.
Wow.
Now, in 2024, it increased. The same thing for overvoting on IREF, the same thing for unaccounted ballot. Everything just increased. Meanwhile, in Ondo,
it dropped.
It dropped. So what it means is that, look, something is not tallying, because the same IREV you use in Edo is the same IREV you use in Ondo. Everything went well in Ondo, something went wrong in Edo. So that needs to be
in your investigation.
Goal is to see how do you improve. It's not basically to use it for litigation. And that is why most times when we release this report, we release it so that we can, I mean, the time of litigation will have, I mean, where you can present it for election, for that, because it is not, that is not the most important thing. Is not that this party A should benefit party B, but calling the attention to that process, that this process, for instance, in 2023, a nation that spent over 400 billion on INEC budget, and then you now have an election that is not tight. You have an election that is questionable. Then, so what do we have to do? We have to research. We have to see what is wrong, and then improve on it.
But
so
you relate this with the electoral umpire?
Of course. Today,
how do they respond to?
For instance, today they were at the public presentation we made, and they took note, and then while we were having a conversation, they are taking this back to the commission to see what they are going to do. And that is for the first time we release this, we have to sit with INEC and say, look, this is what we saw in Kogi Imo Bayelsa. In fact, what we saw in Kogi Imo Bayelsa was very, very alarming. But one thing I need to say is this. Our legislation must begin to look at giving legislative backup for backing for IREF. Until you have that, it just become like a research tool for INEC, and that is why they can even disown the result they put there on themselves. I think we need to begin to look for civil society is that, look, elections, we need to now begin to see the technicality around election. Now, election rigging doesn't mean that, look, they change figures, but it starts from collation at the collation center, and most times we don't observe that. So civil society, everybody need to begin to look into that, and then we must diversify in the area of what do we need to do. Do we want to look at result management? Do we want to look at mobilization? That is that. Therefore, INEC, one, they need to see that, look, they improve this process. This process must be done by, number one, make sure you upload ward level results. And when there are cancellation, let it be. Because on IREF, you have like about 22 form EC40G that talk about cancellation, but none of them, I mean, was accounted for at the final ballot. So that means that election did not hold in some places. At the same time, it was counted at the final ballot. And then the last one, which is the political party, very, very key. The political party need to get their act right, because if you cannot have internal democracy and then you want to go into election and begin to scheme on how to rig, how to bypass beavers, how to bypass the election, how to say, oh, whatever the ballot cannot give me, the courts can give me. So you, instead of you to campaign to people, you are making budget for the court. I mean, it's not going to work well for our democracy, because at the end of the day, it's going to be whoever have the money begin to win, go to court.